It is so good to be here with my three coworkers and accomplished stewardship staff person, Gwen Hoefer, who can share with us her experience being a church staff person during a capital campaign. The insights that she has to share are fantastic. I've known Gwen for more than a year, and she's been on staff at St. Peter's. How many years now, Gwen?
Almost 5, 4.5.
Almost 5. That's fantastic. So she comes to us with a wealth of experience, and we will have a lot of questions for her, but we can also answer the questions that you all have as participants in this webinar. Meredith, I'd like to introduce Meredith. Do you mind talking for 30 seconds about yourself, Meredith? And then Daryl can introduce himself, and then Gwen can introduce herself.
Yes, hi everybody. I do help with the support for churches doing stewardship education through our newsletter and helping to produce these webinars. I've been working with Dennis for 6 or 7 years now, and I love doing churchy stuff in my home parish, and I'm very happy to be here and to hear and learn from you, Gwen, today. So nice to meet everybody and on the webinar. Nice to have you here.
Great to have you here, Meredith. Thank you for your expertise. Daryl, my good man, please introduce yourself, and then we'll shift over to Gwen to introduce herself.
Great. Glad to be on the webinar today. My name is Daryl Prater, and I've been in ministry all my adult life. I have an associate pastor and church music background, did that full time for 18 years. And now I'm in my 18th year of working with Dennis Green, one of our presenters today, and church development. So I love this work and consider it a ministry, and am delighted to be on the webinar.
Great to have you, Daryl. And now our star, the rock star, Gwen, thank you so much for joining us. We promise to be very gentle in the questions that we present. Remember, you don't have to be an expert, just share your experience. Now tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. So as Dennis said, I'm Gwen Hoefer. I have been at St. Peter's, my home parish, for about 4.5 years in the role of Stewardship and Development Director. And I met Daryl and Dennis and Meredith through working on our capital campaign at St. Peter's, and just loved the work they did. And they actually brought me on board to work with them as well as a consultant almost a year ago. So I'm St. Peter's is my home parish. My kids go to school there. I grew up there myself, so that's where I've been my whole life.
And our campaign Commitment Sunday was about 1 year ago.
That's right.
So we really started working together about 2 years ago, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's great. Well,
Yes.
we're great to have you. We're so happy to have you on board. And I suppose I should introduce myself too, Dennis Green. I have been working with church development for 32 years, and for 8 years before that, I did the same kind of work with other nonprofit organizations. So about 40 years in the field. And I know you're thinking, oh, that's when he was born. Yes, that is true. So church development has helped about 300 churches through their capital campaigns, and it has been a tremendous joy. I made a lot of friends. I met my wife, and I got a bunch of kids out of the deal, so I got no complaints. I'm very happy about that. Now, on the next slide, there's information about how you can share this webinar with your committee as well. We will share this with you if you signed up. And you can click on our YouTube channel, which has many of our webinars. My wife has accused me. She says, I know you want why you create those videos. It's so you can watch them. Well, that's kind of true, but it is a ton of good material taken from church capital campaigns. And our theory is we're looking for what works. Following that great American philosopher, Chuck Norris, who said the key to success is to figure out what doesn't work, then don't do that. So I like that advice. We have made every mistake you can make, and now we don't want to make those mistakes anymore. So we continue learning. And as we'll repeat 100 times during this webinar, our dominant values are prayer and discernment instead of pressure, and consensus and engagement. Those two things you'll see evident throughout Gwen's remarks and our approach to our analysis of Gwen's campaign. So we're based in Stewardship, founded in 1992, helped hundreds of churches, raised over $1 billion. And we do a lot of research. We have a book that we'll give you, the Stewardship System, that compiles a whole lot of our research into the factors that promote generosity. We borrow research from academia. Our favorite researcher in that regard is Daniel Kahneman, who got a Nobel Prize for creating the field of behavioral economics. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. We borrow from academics, from the corporate sector, from the nonprofit sector, and from other churches, the 328,000 churches that exist in America. We study and we're members of the associations of those churches as well. So our mission has these twofold elements: prayerful discernment instead of pressure, and community building instead of separation. So that's us. Our campaigns are quite different. It's traditional fundraising really doesn't apply to the church world. We do use the fundraising best practices of top donor cultivation, foundation research, planned giving. In our 3-year follow-up, we push hard on planned giving. We do 3 years of pledge follow-up, and we help every church grow their annual giving. From a stewardship paradigm, we're totally discernment based. We want the decision to give to be based in prayer and not pressure. We find 100 ways to do community building. We want to do shared decision making at each step. And this is all based in scripture. We proceed from 1 Peter 4:10. God has blessed us with everything that we have, and now it's just up to us to really figure out what we're going to do with those blessings. Now, on the next slide is kind of a repeat. This is after, I don't know about you other two, but this is after my hair and makeup. Now it's looking beautiful.
Yes.
Now, it worked for you, not so much for me. But so our interview has these 6 questions, which you'll hear as we go. But we're going to take this screen down here in a second, and we want to hear your questions as well. And Meredith, since she is the most competent among us for technological reasons, she's going to introduce questions as we go. All right, so let's take this down and let's leap into action. Question number 1 up there was, were you a success? And then really, how did you define success? In the feasibility study, the core question was, can we raise money to pay off the debt? And the answer, do you remember what the answer was from the feasibility study?
Yes, the answer was yes. We were able to pay off the debt that we previously had. To answer your question, yes and no. In success, as far as being successful, we were able to pay off the debt. However, we anticipated being able to raise quite a bit more to do some additional remodeling projects, and unfortunately, we have not reached that goal yet. We're hoping to continue to bring in money as the years go by, but yes, go ahead.
So the short answer is yes, we raised money to pay off the debt, but we just really came nowhere near raising the amount of money that we had hoped to raise. So
That's right.
Original inquiry was, could we pay off that debt? And the answer was yes, and more. And then, let's do a little bit of failure analysis, because I feel like Dennis, share some of that burden. When the answer came back yes, immediately I proposed, well, let's fix up the early childhood center. Wham, let's go start developing plans. Now, would you describe in your own words what a train wreck that was?
Yes, well, we jumped ahead, I think, a little bit. We did not have the consensus from specifically the staff that is in charge of the Early Childhood Learning Center, as well as many parishioners that felt that that was not necessary. So we had to do a little bit of research and go back and figure out what exactly the parish wanted and what we needed. We did a safety survey to figure out kind of what we should do with any additional money that was raised. But we had lofty goals that were not met with the same excitement as we had. So
Right. And so I want to kind of own that mistake, just leaping. Now, yes, we can raise more money than pay off the debt, and me just assuming, whoosh, I can decide where. That was the worst mistake. And as a result, we did not raise as much money as we hoped we would raise. So in retrospect, I would like to hear your thoughts. My perspective is I think we should have taken a gigantic pause at that moment and gone back to the parish, open up a whole round of town hall meetings and strategic planning and say, hey, look, we can probably raise more than we need to pay off the debt. What are your priorities? So we should have had a bunch of town hall meetings and surveys and then come back to them and said, here is the consensus from the congregation. Let's go forward and do fundraising then. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Would you do something different?
I agree. We eventually did that step, and it caused us to take a large break in the middle of the campaign, which I think probably led to being not so successful. But I think had we done that to begin with, it would have been probably more successful.
Yeah.
I think just getting everybody's input would have been a huge help for sure.
Right. So the consensus, key number one issue, in my opinion. Now, there were some big differences between this campaign and the previous campaign. So I feel like you were the living embodiment of organizational wisdom, learning from what happened in the previous campaign in terms of what to do and what to not do. Do you mind talking about that previous campaign for a minute?
Sure. So we had a capital campaign about 5 or 6 years ago that was a very large undertaking. We were remodeling the majority of our school, and it was very successful. We raised around $6 million for that. I was not on staff at the time, nor was our pastor. And due to its success, they got a little ahead of themselves as well and decided that an additional project could be done, which was to build a narthex an addition like on next to our church. Sorry. And like we've been talking about, there was not consensus on that. And so even though they went ahead with it and it is now very well loved and used, it did put us into debt, which was not the expectation. And there was a lot of people upset about that. It caused a lot of distrust. When we started thinking about having another campaign, that came up a lot was, oh, you're not going to pay off the debt. You're going to do something else with it, or you're going to put us into further debt. Yeah. Which was hard to deal with. It was, it was not our decision, but we were the ones that had to deal with the backlash from that. So,
right. And your
that was tricky. Oh, yes.
He
Go
was
ahead.
there at that time as well, right?
Right.
He had to deal with that residual.
Yes. In addition, that the previous campaign, we used a different company, and there was a lot of high pressure asking. Letters were actually written to parishioners with specific amounts stated that what they thought that they should be able to give. That offended a lot of people. And again, when we started thinking about another capital campaign, our number one selling point from church development was that was the complete opposite of how they run their campaigns. It's all based on prayer and discernment and not the high pressure ask, which my pastor and myself were very pleased to hear that. That was not how we wanted to run things. That's not either of our personalities. So we were very grateful to hear that this would be run very differently. So
So if we repeated the high pressure, what reception would we have received?
I think everyone would have run for the hills. Nobody wanted to do that.
Uh, So,
I'm sure some money would have come in, but it would have just made more people mad again.
so Daryl, as the lead consultant on the campaign, you participated in the interviews of the feasibility study, and you read all the data from the surveys, and you wrote the recommendations, and then you created that prayer and discernment process. Would you mind talking about that?
Sure. Well, the prayer and discernment process was really led by the campaign prayer team. They were an important and active part of engaging the parish in prayer. So they started with creating a campaign prayer that could be spoken as a part of meetings, events, in mass, individually, and quiet, reflective, personal devotional times. They also created a prayer event that involved parishioners attending in person. And then there was really a kind of a centerpiece approaching commitment weekend in February, a 14-day prayer guide that had a prayer devotional and a prayer, a thought for the day. And now I think you can see that on your screen.
Right.
This was devised with help from church development. We have tons of resources from other churches, but you can see daily devotions there. And that was sent out via email as well as a hard copy for every parish family. So Dennis mentioned we're about prayer and not pressure. Gwen affirmed that as well. And these are some resources that really help prayer. It's not something that we just encourage people to do. Church development has actual resources for people to use during the campaign. So it's very productive and very helpful.
Mhm. Thank you. Okay, so I just got a question that came over the transom. Don't you have to have pressure in order to ask for a fundraising gift? And I would welcome your answer to that, but my answer is no. Best example that comes to my mind is that campaign Daryl ran at St. Anne's, where they raised 7 times annual giving with the exact same model, the orientation towards prayer and discernment instead of pressure. And at 12 Apostles, they raised 5 times annual giving. And we just have so many churches that raise more money than is the norm, based in prayer and discernment. So now if we try to isolate variables, it kind of goes back to the one we talked about right at first. What's your level of consensus and ownership? Which to me is just has risen in its importance. So now I really want to be vocal in every church that we work with. You know, what are we doing from square one to engage people and make sure that they have a sense of ownership? Daryl, you got a comment?
Yeah, Dennis, I'm also reminded along the lines of what you're saying, prayer and not pressure. The church development model is that generally in a capital campaign, the ask is presented about 12 times before we get to commitment weekend. So that's a key part. It's information sharing, engagement, feeding back to the parish what we heard, what we learned, and making sure that the ask is presented all through the campaign. So people can make prayerful decisions about what they're asked, not told, but asked to prayerfully consider.
Okay, here's another question that came across the transom. And Meredith, you jump in when you get one too, but this is from Peter Kardash. How were the blessings of the capital campaign recognized and celebrated? Great question. And how did you do that, Gwen?
Excuse me. Well, we openly discussed our successes in our e-newsletters and in our bulletin. We also hosted an event for our top donors just recently, actually, just to celebrate the success and thank them for their donations. It was a great night of, just fellowship and talking about all the great things that had happened. But I would say, as far as just in general, like the blessings that we saw was really just bringing our parishioners together. We started this at a time kind of post-COVID where everything had been on hold. We hadn't had a lot of social events. We still had a lot of people not coming back to Mass. And these events that we held, the town halls, the listening sessions, really engaged everybody together and brought everyone back. And we've seen that continue. We've had so many social events since then. And it feels like we're back to our regular vibrant community that we've always known. So.
Excellent. Okay, I got two that came in. Let's talk about the COVID question first. The question after this is, how much time did it take you as a staff person to participate in the capital campaign? But the other question is, talk more about the COVID impact. And now, as you're thinking about what you're going to say, I'll tell you my experience this weekend. I facilitated 3 town hall meetings at another parish. And at each one, people took me aside and really forcefully said, we haven't done anything like this for like 3 or 4 years. I mean, COVID is killer. And this is like our very first time we're getting together. And I know I go to church with these people, but I don't ever see them. So this is great. So I had that personal experience. Do you feel like there was a lot of negative COVID impact that our town hall meetings were kind of the balm or the resolution or the healing part of?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we saw a huge decline in Mass attendance. We were, sitting 6 feet apart. There was a lot of people that were just attending Mass online. We had that option. But all social activities and meetings were on hold. And I mean, even now there's still Zoom options, which I actually enjoy that option. Occasionally it's nice to, take a meeting from home instead of being in person. But yeah, I mean, it was a huge impact to our community, and we have a school attached as well. So we saw a lot of differences with that. So I think having the campaign, the timing seemed right for us. It seemed like a really great idea, and it did, like we said, bring everyone back together. So I think that the timing was right. It just unfortunately didn't get the amount of money that we were hoping for. But I think it was right for building our community back. So,
and after all, that's the important thing, right? The
right.
well-being of the church and the congregation is the community. We're woven together like fabric.
That's right.
Very, very important. Okay, so Meredith, I apologize because I've been jumping all over with questions. So you feel free to jump in, but I did get this one about how much time did it take for you as a staff person and your pastor?
Yeah. So I would guess on average, I probably spent about 5 hours a week. I had to attend our management meeting. We had an advisory council meeting. That was usually monthly, but the weekly management meeting. And then I worked a lot with our communications team and the communications person with church development. And so it would have been a lot more if it was just me doing this. That was the main reason that we hired church development, is that they walk along with you the entire time. Daryl and Dennis were fantastic, and they held my hand. I had never done this before, so I wasn't sure what to expect, but they helped with every step of the process. So yeah, I would guess around 5 hours, some weeks less, some weeks more. When we were hosting events, that definitely picked up a little bit, but that was a short-term commitment. So I would say overall it was not detrimental to my regular work, my regular workload. Yeah.
Great. So
I'm gonna.
Oh, and sorry, the pastor too.
the pastor.
Oh yeah, it's the pastor, and then I'll ask the question.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say for him, I would say it was definitely less. He attended the meetings as well, so maybe an hour or two per week at most. And again, with the events, he attended all of those as well, so that might have been a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um,
And he's
but
a
yeah,
delightful chap and very supportive of the capital campaign and attended the meetings
yeah,
and worked hard. I feel like your pastor was kind of the victim of COVID. He came in during COVID and it was hard to get to know anybody. So
hmm,
that social component is very important for the pastor to do that social circulating and connecting as much as possible. And I feel like the capital campaign helped in that regard. Would
yeah, I
you?
think so. Yeah, he is definitely, I would say, a little bit less social than some people. But this campaign really brought it out of him. He was great in small group settings.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, really got to know him more, and parishioners made comments about that all the time about how great it was to talk to him one on one and how engaging he was.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's extremely important for any of you looking to do a campaign. You have to know your pastor and know their comfort level. But having them be social, having them greet parishioners, and what does that look like? Are you just seeing them at mass, or do they have social engagements with parishioners throughout the week or the month?
Mhm.
Getting to know people and just being really visible and active in the parish as well. We have a school, so it's great to have the priest or the pastor also getting to know the kids and being there to greet them and being in the classroom and just always available. So
That's great. That's
yeah,
great.
Gwen, I'm also reminded in our work together, you and I worked really hard to keep your pastor in that spiritual role. And
yes,
so
yes,
he was not leading the campaign, which that would have taken many more hours. So we
sure,
were selective and really kind of guarded his time uh,
absolutely,
to make sure that, he was really giving the big picture, talking about how the capital campaign fit in with the vision that God has given St. Peter's. And also, we try to help him every step of the way and customizing letters that would go out so he would spend very little time. We got to know his writing skills, sending him bullet points for announcements and things like that. So you were really good at partnering on those kind of things.
thanks.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, Meredith, forgive me for putting you off for one more second, but kind of related to this, there's an issue in the church world. Should the pastor know the amount that people give? Now, rather than me expressing my opinion, my opinion doesn't matter. It's what is your comfort level? And
Right,
so you, the listener, the viewer of this webinar, it's up to you to decide that. In general, we want no one to ever know anything about what anybody else gives. So that's just among congregants. No one knows what anybody else gives. You can choose whether your pastor knows or does not know. And uh, from a fundraising perspective, we would like the pastor to know that they don't need to know the exact dollar amount, but at least I would like them to know, here are your top 10 donors, here are your top 20 donors, here are your top 100. And the reason I want them to know that is from your top 10, you're going to raise about half of all the money that you raise. From your top 100, about 80% of all the money that you raise is going to come from them. So I would like the pastor to at least know those names. The standard argument is that we don't want our pastor to treat people differently. Well, I hope they don't. I hope they, even if they knew, I hope they would be equally pastoral to all. And I have yet to find a circumstance where that was not the case. I feel like pastors, I could never do that job. That's a tough job, but they tend to be virtuous people and they do treat people the same regardless of the amount that has been given. Okay, now I got another question, but first is Meredith, and then we're going to go to Daryl to talk about the 3-year follow-up. Meredith, fire away.
Yeah, and this maybe kind of leads well into the talking about the follow-up, but this is a question that came from registration. Somebody put this in, and they were talking about doing some projects in stewardship related to hospitality and trying to include more people and get more members and congregants for their church. And I wondered if maybe this might be a good chance for you to talk about, I think I remember you saying that St. Peter's had gone through the Rebuilt program, and that fit well with the church development community building model. So I know you've already talked a lot about engagement and consensus, but if you could just talk about how the capital campaign related to that goal of being a welcoming and including community and evangelization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hospitality was one of our main goals when we did the Rebuilt program, and that really, really worked well leading into this. I think it led to a lot of episodic volunteer opportunities, which people like, which is, just short-term volunteer assignments or whatever that they can do, that makes them feel like they're part of something, because it's important to remember that it's not necessarily about how much the volunteer can help, but it's about getting them involved. Sometimes it might feel like it's more work for you to actually tell that volunteer how to do what it is that you're asking them to do, or that you might need to be there as well. But it's about getting them involved and having them feel like they're part of something. So that was really important. And we had lots of opportunities for involvement and for volunteer different roles for them to do. So did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I think they were just wanting to know about that hospitality aspect and how it relates to campaign.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. With with each
hopefully,
meeting.
if that didn't answer your question, whoever that question came from, please chime in on the chat so we can clarify.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Meredith.
The research on church membership has now expanded in a whole new path in researching church shoppers. And the term was coined by a researcher named George Barna, and he tells us there are 5 predictable times when a person does church shopping behaviors, and they'll go visit a handful of churches. Unfortunately, what Barna discovered was the dominant criteria for church selection was a social one. Does a person feel welcome and connected and greeted? I remember working at one church in Liberty, Missouri, where we had a woman volunteer to be in charge of the social component of a capital campaign, and she was just so committed to wanting to make this work. And I finally asked her one day, well, first of all, thank you for being so enthusiastic and committed, but why? Where does all this energy come from? And she said, I went to church here for a year before anybody talked to me. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I admire your commitment to stick it out. And now here you're making this church a better place because you are devoted to that welcoming greeting process, which we know for sure has a positive impact. As a matter of fact, in the book, Why Catholics Don't Give by Charles Zeck, one of his 9 factors is that Catholic churches tend to be not very welcoming. And he has a corresponding statistic in his book, Best Practices in Stewardship, where he says churches that have a vigorous, enthusiastic, robust, welcoming process, their giving is 9% above the norm. So we can measure, there's an economic benefit of being good at that social connecting process. So welcoming gets you new members, and it gets you an increased level of giving as well. Now, forgive me for just jumping all over the place, all nimbly bimbly like a little kitty cat. But let me just go to Daryl and say, Daryl, what does your 3-year follow-up process look like with St. Peter's?
Well, church development is with St. Peter's all through the 3 years of follow-up. So a part of what we do is that we assist and provide resources for their annual offertory, their annual stewardship emphasis. So we have a lot of resources that we've developed through the years, and then we customize those for St. Peter's Parish as needed. So that's 3 years of offertory emphasis during the 3 years of follow-up. We also will evaluate where the church is with planned giving, also known as estate giving, and help them to make that more robust, develop that a little more fully with the guidance of a committee. We've come across a system that is really very simple, but it works. Kind of going back to the Chuck Norris, we've done that several times. What doesn't work, and don't do that. So, but we're on something now that seems to really work. And so we help churches with planned giving. And I just attended a gratitude event recently at an Episcopal church, really a lovely event where all those who had remembered the church in their estate plans were invited. And it was a very affirming and wonderful event, and hopefully the beginning of an annual gratitude event for the future of that church. So those are just a couple of things that we really help during follow-up. So we are not just checking out about a month after Commitment Sunday. We're not a group that just says, yeah, we do follow up and then we don't do anything. We are very active during those 3 years.
And you left out some of the concrete things. So we want to help improve weekly giving, and we want to encourage and move towards a robust planned giving effort. But you're very modest in saying we help with stewardship, that we would even be concrete and we would examine, do you make it easy to give? Like we posed the question, if I'm a repeat visitor and I don't have a checkbook, and my 38-year-old son doesn't have a checkbook and he doesn't have cash ever. So, as a young family going church shopping, they've been there a couple times, they want to give. Do you make it easy to give? And I would even ask, do you have a QR code on your Sunday bulletin where a person can just click and give? Do you have a dip jar, which is an electronic device in your foyer that in 1 second I could make a $20 gift? Do you make it easy to give and to connect? Because unfortunately, those of us who have been to church at the same place for a long time, we just settle into a groove and we don't even think about visitors or new families. So we want to kind of nudge in that direction as well. All right, now, Meredith, as we move towards wrapping this webinar up, we have some advice and takeaways. But I want to check with you, Meredith. Do we have any other questions that we need to address before we move into the advice and takeaways that you prepared for us?
I think just wanting to know what you would have done the same and maybe what you would have done differently if you were to do the same campaign, the same situation, circumstances, not being perfect, but given the circumstances you were given, what would you do the same and what would you do differently?
Oh, you're on mute. Hold on.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So I think what I would have done the same would have been, the volunteer engagement. The town halls were fantastic. I wish we had done those sooner. So I guess that's something doing different, like we mentioned before. I think once we realized from the feasibility study that we had the potential of raising additional funds, that really getting that consensus up front would have made a huge difference. I absolutely would have hired church development again and again. They're wonderful to work with. Obviously I joined their team as well. So that was fantastic. Still is. I don't know.
Okay, here's a burning question.
Yeah.
Would you, if like, you're probably going to do another capital campaign at some point in the future, would you hire a professional or would you do it yourself?
Oh, definitely hire a professional. Yeah.
Well,
There's
thank
no.
you for saying that, since you are one.
Yes. No, there's no even thought about that. When we even first considered doing this campaign, I mean, I was like a deer in headlights. I was like, I can't do that by myself. And was very grateful my pastor was on board to hire a team to assist. It is a lot of work, and I am very grateful to both Dennis and Daryl for all your help with planning our campaign.
A pleasure.
Mm,
So
yeah.
following along with that, would the next campaign be similar in that it would be based in consensus and prayer, or would you go to the high pressure?
No, I think the prayer and discernment is definitely the way to go. It's just a lot calmer. It's, I think it makes everyone just feel better about it. Stewardship is about giving out of your heart, not because you feel like you have to or that someone's telling you what to give. So I think that's the most important thing, and that's the way that everyone should give to their church or their however they would like to donate.
Mhm.
So yeah.
And I mean, that's congruent with Charles Eck's research in those 2 volumes I mentioned a moment ago, Why Catholics Don't Give and Best Practices in Stewardship. His research out of Villanova comes down really hard and rigorous towards Catholics need to promote giving based on reflection about the percentage one might give,
Mhm.
rather than here's a dollar amount, this is your bill. And he comes at that from both a theological perspective and a scientific perspective. Once I ran a diocesan campaign where we began the campaign asking for a specific dollar amount. Right at about 15% of the people who received that request complained directly and vigorously. So the diocesan stewardship person who got beat up by those said, look, can we please do something different? And my answer was yes, there's this great research on Catholic churches, and they promote the percentage giving reflective question. And I embraced that. And boy, the amount of anger and complaints decreased from 15% to 0. Just in the next wave, it happened immediately. And we still raised a ton of money as well. So one of the things we discovered was that if you do the prayer and discernment based ask, you usually raise more money than you do in the high pressure ask, and weekly giving goes up as well. Daryl, do you mind talking about St. Margaret's, that campaign? I feel like that was a great example of what happens when you do discernment and engagement right.
Right. Well, in that campaign, we had 3 asks on commitment weekend. We had the capital campaign, we had the annual offertory, and then there was the Catholic annual appeal. So that was a pretty aggressive campaign. Specifically on the annual offertory, they received about a 20% increase in offertory giving through the pledges on commitment weekend. So overall, they met their capital campaign goal. They exceeded by 20% their annual offertory from previous year, and they exceeded their Catholic diocesan ask. So it's very successful. Doesn't always happen that way, but it's generally very successful.
Well, Daryl's modest. I mean, he raised 3.5 times annual giving in that capital campaign. So with that huge amount of money, it would have been logical to assume that weekly giving would have contracted. But instead, it grew by 20%. Totally counterintuitive. You would think there would be anger about having 3 asks on one pledge card. You think, and the number one thing that would suffer would be the bishop's annual appeal because everybody's mad about that, right? Well, they hit their goal there as well. So it is counterintuitive, yet I believe it is a testimony to the efficacy of engagement and prayer-based ask. I believe that's a great example, and that's kind of our norm. That Daryl's experience at St. Margaret is kind of our norm. And then when we have an experience like we did at St. Peter's, I do want to learn from that, and I want to ask the question, and what could we have done differently? And I apologize that I did not more vigorously push consensus-based decision-making about the question, if we raise more money than we need to pay off the debt, what should we spend that on? And I feel like I made a mistake. I feel bad about that and won't make that mistake again. So I apologize to you and St. Peter's for just assuming that we can just forge ahead and everyone will agree with me. That's never a good assumption. All right, Meredith, tell us more. Okay, here's our advice and takeaways. Thank you for being just right on it, Meredith. Hire a professional. Campaigns should be low pressure and with a high level of consensus. We should really tune into the pastoral needs and connect people socially and be willing to take all the time that is required to make sure their pastoral needs are met and their social needs are met. If there's ever an experience of somebody in decision making decision unilaterally, we should recognize, hey, we made a mistake. Acknowledge it, and then work to repair those mistakes and be transparent. You know, the transparency issue is another thing quoted by Zech and Why Catholics Don't Give. We really need to be very transparent. I really like, one of my favorite transparency activities comes from Visitation Parish, where they produce an annual report that covers every component. They do it every year and say, where did your money go? You know, what did we do as a parish? And it's wonderful because I can flip through a couple pages and I can see all the ministry impact, worship activities, outreach, how we're making the world a better place. I love that idea of having an annual report, and the person who produces it, Megan Berdowski, is brilliant and very much a professional. And I think everybody ought to copy her and copy that. It's just, that's the way to do number 4. That's how you build trust, complete transparency. And then the final thing that I want to kind of close our webinar on is do the asking based in prayer and discernment. We started with the scripture, 1 Peter 4:10. God's given us everything that we got, so it's up to us to figure out how are we a conduit for God's blessings. I think that's a great discernment thought to reflect upon every single day. All right, so Meredith, our next webinar, what are we talking about?
Yeah, we are going to be talking about planned giving, or sometimes referred to as legacy gifts or estate planning. That's a big part of our follow-up ministry with our churches, and a lot of churches don't have a program like that in place. I think the statistic is something like 70% of people pass away without an estate plan. We really want to offer that as a ministry to members of the parish, the congregation, and encourage them to think intentionally about how they want to share those blessings that God has given them, and care for the church and their families, and give them some information that they might not know where to go to look to do that. So we're going to be talking about that, how to get a program like that started at your parish or church, how to tell members what they should do to get started with an estate plan or legacy giving, and then what not to do. And also kind of talking a little bit about what you might hope to raise in a planned giving campaign or planned giving effort. So that will be our April webinar. We'll bring in an expert to talk about that, and we'll send the invitation in our monthly newsletter. So if you don't subscribe to our monthly newsletter, to get that invitation, you can subscribe at church-development.com and click on our resources page, and there is a form to fill out to subscribe there. So hopefully you guys can make it. Great to have you here on the webinar today. And thank you so much, Gwen, for sharing your expertise and experience and talking about what you do differently and what you do the same. I think that's really helpful for everyone to hear.
Great. So from
Thank you.
all of us at Church Development, thank you so much for joining us. Go forth, good luck, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.